My boss looked me in the eye and said, "Leadership isn't for emotional females. You understand, right?" Then he promoted my male coworker to the position I'd been working toward for 3 years. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly buying shares of our company for the past 2 years. And at the next board meeting, when he tried to push through another sexist policy, I stood up and revealed that I owned 51% of the company. I am now his boss. This is how it happened. My name is Rachel, I'm 34, and I work in tech, or I should say I own a tech company now. But 2 years ago, I was just a senior product manager at a mid-sized software firm called DataStream Solutions. I'd been there for 5 years. I built our flagship product from the ground up. I managed a team of 12 people. I brought in millions in revenue. By every metric, I was the top performer in my department. My boss, Greg, was a classic tech bro, 45 years old, always talking about his golf handicap and his Tesla. He'd made his money in the dot-com boom and thought that made him a genius. The company had about 50 employees, and he ran it like his personal kingdom. For 3 years, I'd been gunning for the VP of product position. It was the next logical step. Greg kept saying, "You're almost ready. Just keep proving yourself." So I did. I worked 70-hour weeks. I led the development of 3 successful products. I personally closed a deal with a Fortune 500 client that brought in $2 million in revenue. Meanwhile, my coworker Brandon did the bare minimum. He'd been at the company for 2 years, managed a team of 4, and spent half his day playing ping pong in the break room. But he and Greg were buddies. They'd go golfing together on weekends. They were both members of the same country club. When the VP position finally opened up, I knew it was mine. I had the experience, the track record, the team support. I'd earned it. I walked into Greg's office for what I thought was the promotion conversation. "Rachel, sit down," Greg said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I wanted to talk to you about the VP position." "Great," I said, smiling. "I've been looking forward to this." "Well," he shifted uncomfortably, "we've decided to go with Brandon." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Brandon? He's been here 2 years. He's never managed a major product launch." He's a natural leader," Greg interrupted. "Very commanding presence. The kind of guy who can walk into a room and take charge. You know, I've been leading teams for 5 years," I said slowly. "I just closed the biggest deal in company history." Greg sighed. "Rachel, you're great at what you do. You're detail-oriented, organized, supportive. But leadership, that's a different skill set. It requires a certain kind of authority that, frankly, women struggle with." I stared at him. "Excuse me? Come on, you know what I mean. Leadership isn't for emotional females. You're too empathetic, too focused on feelings. Brandon has that alpha presence we need at the executive level. You understand, right?" I understood perfectly. I understood that I'd just been passed over for a promotion because of my gender, and my boss had been stupid enough to say it out loud. "Is this official?" I asked quietly. "Brandon starts next week. But don't worry, you'll keep your current role. You're valuable where you are." I walked out of his office in a daze. That night, I went home and cried for about an hour. Then I got angry. Then I got strategic. See, here's something most people didn't know about DataStream Solutions. It was a private company, and Greg owned about 60% of it. The remaining 40% was split among early investors and a few key employees who'd been granted equity. Greg had offered me equity when I joined, 2% of the company as part of my compensation package. At the time, the company was valued at about $5 million, so my shares were worth $100,000. Not nothing, but not life-changing money either. But over the past 5 years, we'd grown. We were now valued at about $30 million. And some of those early investors wanted out. I started making phone calls. The first person I called was Tom, one of the original angel investors. He owned 8% of the company and was in his 70s, looking to liquidate his assets. "Tom, I'm interested in buying your shares," I said. "Would you be willing to sell?" "To you?" He sounded surprised. "Why?" "Because I believe in this company, and I want a bigger stake in its future." We negotiated for 2 weeks. I ended up buying his 8% for $2.4 million. I took out a massive loan, liquidated my retirement accounts, and borrowed money from my uncle. It was every penny I had and then some. Then I called Sarah, another early investor who owned 6%. She was going through a divorce and needed cash. I bought her shares for $1.8 million. I was now heavily in debt, but I owned 16% of the company. Over the next year, I quietly approached every small shareholder. A guy who owned 3% and had taken a job overseas. A woman who'd inherited 2% from her father and had no interest in tech. Another early employee who owned 4% and wanted to start his own business. One by one, I bought them out. I took on more debt. I negotiated payment plans. I used every connection I had. Greg had no idea. The transactions were private, and shareholders weren't required to disclose who they sold to. As far as he knew, I was just his hardworking product manager who'd accepted being passed over for promotion. Brandon, meanwhile, was failing spectacularly at his new VP role. He'd made 3 major mistakes in 6 months that cost us clients. But Greg kept defending him. He's still learning. Give him time. After 18 months of secret buying, I owned 31% of the company. I needed 20% more to have majority control. That's when I got lucky. One of the biggest investors, a venture capital firm that owned 25%, decided to exit. They were liquidating their entire portfolio to focus on cryptocurrency investments. I met with them. The price was $7.5 million. I didn't have it. Not even close. But I had a pitch. I want to buy your shares, I told the VC partners. But I need financing. They looked at my track record. I'd built 3 successful products. I'd brought in millions in revenue. I had the respect of the entire product team. If you loan me the money to buy your shares, I said, I'll pay you back at 12% interest over 5 years. And I'll guarantee it with my existing equity. They thought I was insane. But they also saw the numbers. DataStream was growing fast, and I was the one driving that growth. They agreed. They sold me their 25% and financed the purchase. I now owned 56% of DataStream Solutions. I was the majority shareholder. The company was mine. And Greg had no idea. I waited for the perfect moment. I didn't tell anyone. Not my team, not my friends, not even my family. I wanted to see the look on Greg's face when he found out. That moment came 3 months later. Greg announced in an all-hands meeting that he was restructuring the company. He wanted to cut the product team by 20% and shift resources to sales. It was a terrible idea that would have gutted our core business. We'll vote on this at the next board meeting, he said confidently. The board of DataStream consisted of major shareholders. Greg had always controlled these meetings because he had 60%. He could pass whatever he wanted. But he didn't have 60% anymore. He had 34%. And I had 56%. I walked into the board meeting that Thursday morning. It was just the major shareholders, Greg, myself, and 2 other investors who each owned about 5%. Greg started the meeting with his usual swagger. All right, let's get down to business. I'm proposing we cut 20% of the product team to reallocate budget to sales. I'll need a vote to approve. I vote no, I said. Greg barely looked at me. Rachel, this isn't really a vote for you. You own 2%. This is a formality. Actually, I said, pulling out a folder. I own 56%. The room went silent. Greg stared at me. What? I've spent the past 2 years buying shares from other investors. I now own 56% of this company, which makes me the majority shareholder, which means I control this board, which means your restructuring plan is dead. I slid the documentation across the table. Official share transfer records, notarized contracts, everything legal and binding. Greg's face went from confused to pale to bright red. You can't. This isn't legal. It's completely legal. I have a lawyer on standby if you'd like to verify. He grabbed the papers, his hands shaking. Where did you get the money for this? I worked for it. I earned it. I built products that made this company valuable, and then I invested in that value. Unlike some people, I didn't get my money from luck and golf buddies. The other investors were staring at me with what looked like respect. Now, I continued. Let's talk about actual company business. First item. I'm proposing we remove Greg as CEO and replace him with someone who actually understands our product. You can't do this, Greg shouted. I can, actually. I have majority control. That's how companies work. That's the alpha leadership you're always talking about, Greg. He looked like he might have a heart attack. This is insane. You're too emotional for this role. You'll run this company into the ground. I smiled. Leadership isn't for emotional males. You understand, right? The other investors actually laughed. I'm calling for a vote, I said. All in favor of removing Greg as CEO? I raised my hand. The other 2 investors, who'd clearly been unhappy with Greg for a while, raised theirs. Motion passes. Greg, you're fired. Greg tried to fight it legally. His lawyers sent threatening letters. But everything I'd done was completely legal. He'd been outvoted by the majority shareholder. Case closed. I became CEO 2 weeks later. Brandon, the natural leader, quit within a month. He couldn't handle working for a woman, apparently. I hired a woman as the new VP of product. She's brilliant, experienced, and definitely not too emotional to lead. In my first year as CEO, we grew revenue by 40%. We launched 2 new products. We were named one of the best places to work in tech. Greg sent me an email 6 months after I fired him. The subject line was, "Congratulations." The email said, "You proved me wrong. The company is thriving." I was an idiot. I never responded. People ask me if I feel bad for what I did, if it was too ruthless, too aggressive. I tell them the same thing every time. I spent 3 years proving myself while being told I wasn't leadership material because of my gender. I worked harder than anyone in that company and got passed over for a promotion that went to an underqualified man. So no, I don't feel bad. I feel powerful. And every time someone tells me women can't lead, I just smile and think about the day I walked into that board meeting and took control of an entire company. Leadership isn't for emotional females? Wrong. Leadership is for anyone willing to work for it. And I worked harder than anyone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more emotional true stories every day.